Thank you for joining me today on Barb's Healthy Life. Please subscribe below to catch all of Barb's Healthy Life videos. Today's Make and Taste recipe is from Deliciously Ella, which I found in her latest cookbook. It's an orange and blueberry cake. I started by juicing one orange, which I need for the wet ingredients for the cake. Next, I measured out 200 grams of pine nuts. The recipe calls for cashews, but I'm sensitive to the cashews, and you can always replace cashews with pine nuts. I used my new scale, which I got on Amazon, and I can link below. It's simple to use, lightweight, and thin. You can store it out of the way easily. Once I had the correct amount of pine nuts, I filled the bowl with water to let them soak for a few hours. The next thing I did was grind up my almonds in my coffee grinder. It needed a lot of almond flour, so this took a few times. As you can see, I'm speeding up the video because this cake did take quite a long time to make. It has several components. You have the wet and dry ingredients for the actual cake. It has an orange jam I need to make on the stove, and then also the icing for the top. So if you're looking for a quick cake recipe that's vegan and gluten-free, this would not be your cake recipe. At this point, you'll see me picking out larger pieces of almonds that did not grind down into a flour. Now we're ready to mix the dry ingredients. We need the ground almonds and some brown rice flour, which you'll see here. Next, I add the baking soda, and then I'll whisk it up. I still find a few pieces of almond that are a little too big for my liking, so I give them a toss. Next, I add just a little bit of salt. Our first wet ingredient is chickpea liquid from the can of chickpeas. The second is our freshly squeezed orange juice, and thirdly, we have maple syrup. That all gets whisked together, and then we're going to add some vanilla extract. The recipe calls for a teaspoon of vanilla powder, which is optional, but since I don't have that, I just use the extract instead. I also need to add 3 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar, and then back to whisking again. At this point, we're getting ready to pour the batter into the cake pans. I did use a little bit of oil just to make them non-stick because I couldn't find matching silicone pans and I wanted them to be the same size. The cake batter should be watery, but not too watery, just like regular cake batter would be for any other cake that you would make. I tried to divide the cake batter evenly, and then I put it in the oven at about 400 degrees. In order to make the orange jam, which goes in the middle of the cake, I squeezed 3 oranges. If you've never made your own orange juice before, I highly recommend it. It strengthens your arm muscles. Once you have your orange juice, you can add that to a small pan. Then you're going to add some maple syrup to that for a little extra sweetness, and then also some of your tapioca flour. This helps to make the jam. Give it a good stir, let it boil, and then lower the heat and let it simmer for 10 to 15 minutes. It should thicken considerably. Next, I'm working on the icing. I'm taking some of those orange peels and getting the zest. I'm testing the jam to make sure that it can coat the back of a spoon for a couple seconds before running off. I don't think it's quite ready yet. I'm going to leave it on the stove to cook. Next, I get ready to take the cake out of the oven by putting out the racks. So I pull the cake out of the oven and test it. I decide it's not ready yet, so back in the oven it goes. I decide it's time to start working on the icing. So I'm going to drain my pine nuts through a colander and go and grab my food processor. I still don't think the jam is ready, so I continue making the icing. In the food processor goes the pine nuts and the almond milk, and some more maple syrup, my favorite part. This may take some time in the food processor, so I need to get started by turning it on. Then I realized I forgot the orange zest, so in goes the orange zest and the food processor goes back on. The orange jam looks like it's just about done, as you can see in the side picture on the screen. I may have cooked it a little bit too long, as you'll see later in the video. Now it's time to check the cake once again to see if it's finished. I pull it out of the oven, but it's not quite ready yet, so back into the oven it goes. The icing's been blending for quite a while in the food processor, so I test it to see how it looks. Looks pretty thick. I think it's probably ready. And looks like the cake is ready too. When the cake cools, I empty it onto the baking racks. As you can see, one of them stuck a little bit to the pan. This is the most exciting time. Now I get to put the cake together. First I put the bottom layer that stuck, and then I add the jam. Here's where you can see it looks a little bit gooey sticky. Probably cooked it just a little bit too long, but it still tastes amazing, so it's okay. Next comes the second layer of cake, and then finally we add the icing. The icing spreads really easily, and since I don't need to spread the icing on the side, and that's usually the hardest part, I really like this cake idea. Next, we sprinkle the top with blueberries, and it looks awesome. The cake cut relatively easily, and you can see what it looks like as I cut it. The layers go together, the jam looks awesome, the icing looks delicious, so we're gonna give it a try. It should be noted that this cake took 4 hours to make from start to finish. The moment of truth. Let's taste it. Try to get a little bit of all of it together in the bite. The almond flavor is really shining through. It's very delicious with the orange. Nice, let's try and get a blueberry in there. Blueberry adds a nice touch, but not necessary. I might add some orange zest on top. The icing's very light. I would definitely keep this in the refrigerator to last longer. All in all, I think this one is not a fail, it's fabulous. So you heard it here first. Ella's orange blueberry cake recipe is fabulous. Thank you for joining Bart's Healthy Life for another Make and Taste video.